Hey, all you feminards out there, this is Beckah.
And this is Leigh.
And we are so excited to be back. We are so sorry that it has taken us so long to record another episode. As you're probably aware, if you're listening in real time or have studied history, things are weird right now and things are stressful, less so for me than they are for Leigh, who is a teacher and is having to deal with all sorts of fun things. So we do appreciate your patience and we appreciate you sticking around for us.
Absolutely. And I'm very happy that we get to do this again. I have missed this terribly. I've missed you, Beckah. And so I'm very excited to get back into the swing of things.
Me too. And I moved again. So, I moved twice in the last year, 3 times. So, no, twice. And so, it's just been harder for me to coordinate Leigh and I getting together, and we're in a different time zone now. But we're really looking forward to future episodes. We have some really fun things coming up. So this episode, we wanted to talk about webcomics because that's something that I typically don't read, but we have encountered every once in a while. And I think that webcomics affords some freedom of style and content that published physical comics sometimes doesn't. And so we wanted to talk about some of those. So not being very familiar with the webcomics world and knowing that there's approximately 8 gajillion comics to choose from, I just found a couple of lists of best webcomics by queer authors or people of color, and so sent a few suggestions to Leigh, and I chose a few, so we're going to talk about those today. Is there one that you wanted to start with, Leigh?
I'm not sure. I picked 3 as well. I don't know if you want to jump into the one that I found stressful or...
We can do that one first so we can get it out of the way if you want.
Okay, yeah. And then if I have a panic attack, I'll just go off mic for a minute there until I catch my breath.
Oh, dear.
So one of the comics that I chose was Stand Still, Stay Silent by Minna Sundberg. And it's been 90 years after the end of the old world. Most of the surviving population of the known world live in Iceland, the largest safe area in existence, while the safe settlements in the other Nordic countries are Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland are all small and scarce. Countless mysterious and unspoken dangers lurk outside the safe areas of the silent world. There's hunters, mages, and cleansers that will spend their lives defending the settlements against the terrifying beings. Because of a great fear towards everything in the silent world, no official attempts to explore the ruins of the old world have been made, and most of the information about it has turned into ancient lore known by few. But now it is time to send out a research crew into the great unknown. A poorly funded and terribly unqualified crew, but a crew nonetheless. So this comic started in 2013, and I guess the reason why I found it stressful is because the reason that the world has ended in this comic is because of a mass pandemic. And the plague that kills pretty much everybody in the world starts off... what I read, the first 50 pages is the, current times is what it's supposed to be before the 90-year gap when it's kind of plunged everybody back into the old days or the medieval times in some ways. So anyway, the way that this plague occurred and the way that people behaved and the way that people quarantined and also tried to escape to safer lands was so eerily accurate to the way our COVID-19 pandemic started. And so I found myself having to take breaks from this comic because I would start to panic a little bit. like, you know, there was a whole section on when masks were being required and the way people were like behaving about that. And
No.
yeah,
Oh, dear.
you know, and then, you know, and how the, you know, it was very eerily the same thing. And the fact that this was written in 2013, I just mentally I couldn't handle it. Like that was just too much for me. And I found myself dreading getting past the, you know, the preface of you know, this whole situation and what the world's going to look like after 90 years. And it is basically, it's like a game of, it's just like a survival situation. And yeah, I don't know. It was, I think if I would have read this before the pandemic, I would have just treated it like a D&D game or, you know, one of those like survival board games type things or video games and not really given it much thought. But because we are currently in a pandemic, it hit home in a way that I just didn't think it was going to. And I just really, so I'm sorry. That's one of the reasons why this podcast took so long, because it took me a really long time to get up the courage to read it.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
That's
so I'm
a
so
lot.
sorry. But it is really good. One of my favorite pages was, I think it's page 25, where a woman is picking up her sister or something like that. So she's in the car kind of talking to herself, but she's looking outside and I'm like observing people and the way that they're behaving. And she's discussing about how disgusting people can be. Like that person sneezed on that, you know, and like, you know, and how people don't wash their hands and all these things. And I just like the whole time I'm reading it, I'm thinking, oh my God, that's exactly what I think when I see people out in public doing things that I'm like, oh my God, we're in a pandemic. What are you thinking? Like,
Yeah.
so I totally kind of chuckled at that page because I'm like, I'm totally like her, just looking around being like, we deserve this. We're disgusting human beings.
Did you feel that any of the characters were compelling enough to for you to want to continue the story, or was just the story too overwhelming?
One of the things with webcomics that sometimes I have an issue with. It just depends. Some webcomics don't do it, but this one in particular. There were so many characters in this, and because I mean, they're different people and they're different experiences, and then different parts of the country that it was in and everything like that, and I couldn't keep track of anybody, to tell you the truth. So no, there wasn't any characters that really stuck out to me. It just seemed like a lot of just people and like going to their personal experience and then switching to a different person and their experience. I feel like probably when the second half of the story after the 90 years and they send out this research group and they start going and exploring the rest of the area that, you know, everybody's afraid to, that seems to be a smaller group of people, and that will probably be more like, you know, delving into those characters. But I only hit the tip of the iceberg on that. I think I only read the first few pages of it because, like I said, the beginning was 50 pages and I was like, whoa, I got to limit this at some point because I got to get to the next comic. So I do think that will end up happening if I continue with this comic. I can't necessarily say that I'm going to,
Sure.
but maybe years in the future I might go back to it. But yeah, right now it's a bit much for me. But I did love how it was drawn. It was very beautiful. It's very detailed, and the coloring is kind of cool. It's a lot of red, blue, and yellow, so you know, primary colors, but muted. They weren't like super bright, and then like a lot of like, you know, tan, very pale tan and black. And so it gave it almost like an old map feel, like the way it is. But I also noticed that all the countries that they were highlighting in this, which were like Sweden and Norway and Finland and all those things, their flags all seem to have a composite of those colors. So it was almost like they used that in it as well to do that. I don't know. It was a warm coloring comic, I would say. It felt very much like I was reading it through like a, you know, an old world book, you know, with parchment and inks type feel. So I kind of liked that bit of it.
Almost like a watercolor kind of feel?
Not necessarily. Sometimes, but not necessarily. I think it's done digitally.
Okay.
but it has almost, yeah, it kind of crosses. It sometimes looks very digital, and sometimes it looks a little watercolor color like. Sometimes it looks a little colored pencil like. I don't know. That's the interesting thing when you draw things digitally, is that it kind of pulls upon all these different mediums and kind of blends them into one, and it's kind of hard to nail down exactly the look of it, when you use all those different kinds of brushes and textures. But I just really liked it. I thought it was very beautifully drawn and very in depth. I mean, some of the dialogues were like whole pages. So it's definitely a deep comic, and it's a lot to read. But yeah, no, I do like it. I do think it's very well done. It's just in a current pandemic, it's a little stressful to read.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that. I think when I was looking through, the art style is what stood out to me, and that's kind of why I included it. I don't think I even knew what it was about. But yeah, I think with webcomics, it is really hard to like sit down and like read a bunch all at once. So there's definitely one of mine I read all of because it was a reasonable amount and I just loved it so much. But one of them I had a really hard time getting into, and then I like looked at how many episodes there were and I was like, oh, I don't know like how far I can get into this. So
Yeah,
I wonder like if you're reading it on a weekly basis, like
probably.
when the panels are coming out. But then I also feel like that for me would feel like a very disjointed experience. Like I would probably forget what happened in the page before, and then like it's such a slow burn. Like you were talking about, when you do have all of the pages available, you do have that scope that you can really kind of take your time. You're not stuck to that like 12 to 14 pages issue, or a graphic novel length. But that does make it a little bit harder to jump in.
Right.
And so yeah, I wonder kind of what that is like for the people who are really into the genre, and kind of how they manage that in their kind of regular reading. But I also feel like, part of the reason I wanted to talk about webcomics is because there's definitely things that you can do with webcomics that you just can't do with a print comic. Like you said, there's like all these characters, and you could very easily have a character map, or a list of characters that then me as a reader, I can go back and say, wait, who is this person again? And like that isn't taking up page space on something
Right,
that is
yeah.
a physical book. So that's something I think that it affords, and it does, like you said, kind of offer this scope. But that does make it a little hard sometimes. So one of the comics I read is called Blackout City. It's by a person named Jaye Fabel. And this is the one that I kind of like, I thought it sounded really interesting, but even the synopsis was a little hard for me to follow. And then I started reading it and I was like, I have no idea what's going on. So the synopsis on the website is that Officer Makita Marigo was last seen at an underground fight with a strange tattoo on her arm. An overeager police secretary, Coda, is determined to find her, even if he has to do it alone. Even if he has to do it with Liren, a reckless fighter who plays life like a video game. Coda's first case might be more than he can handle, with makeshift robots, vengeful gods, digital dreams, and the mysterious Leviathan of the Southern Rain standing between him and the answers. So, like, there's a lot going on in here. It has a very cool art style. The color scheme really reminds me of, oh, who keeps breaking up with me? Something Greene keeps
Oh,
breaking up
Laura
with me.
Dean.
Laura Dean, thank
Yeah.
you. I literally had it in my head as I was like, I'm going to talk about this, and then I forgot it. Laura Dean keeps breaking up with me, so it's a lot of like pale pinks, also kind of that pastel kind of palette, kind of a little bit looser in terms of the style. It feels like it has a much more kind of classic anime kind of style for sure. And so there's definitely things that make it feel a little foreign. And I don't know if it was originally written in English, because there are a few things that, like sentence structures, that feel a little strange. But yeah, it was really hard to kind of follow you're pretty much starting the story through this character named Coda, who is the secretary for this police department, but who is like has a hyper good memory and like knows all of these cases and kind of knows what is going on and what should be going on, and then, you know, talks to this police officer and is like, oh, did you get this tattoo? And she's like, no, I don't have a tattoo. What are you talking about? But then he sees her, follows her, and sees her going into this like illegal, I assume illegal, it's like an underground fight thing. And the other thing that coincides is there's this guy who shows up who's like, I'm looking for my sister. And then when Coda follows the police officer, he sees that this person who reported his sister missing is a fighter, and so they kind of meet up. There's some like, I don't know if they're robots. He was fighting some sort of like lizard-like thing, and I don't know if it was like a genetically altered lizard or a robot or what. So there's definitely a lot going on. I think there's some really cool kind of Ghost in the Shell vibes that has that kind of like secret police. I'm going outside of the law, you know, to try and figure out the truth kind of thing. But yeah, I found it a little bit difficult to get into. And so I only read the first 2 episodes and didn't really feel like I had a good handle on like what exactly was happening. Because that's the other thing too, is these webcomics can, with the scope, can kind of introduce things slowly and in like little bits and pieces. And so then I'm like, well, I'm not sure how this relates to that. And how long am I going to have to wait until I find out? So yeah, I think it's a really interesting story. I think there's a lot that's really working for it, but overall it felt a little messy. So I really like the style. I think the kind of minimalist colors, the kind of loose style really works for what the story is. And I like that it's from somebody who's like not a police officer. Like they are very ingrained in that world, but they are from an outside perspective. So we kind of get a little bit more of that, like, well, I'm not really sure what's going on. Everyman kind of perspective, which I really appreciate. So I think it's engaging enough that I might go back to it at some point to kind of see what it's all about. But for now, it didn't really keep me close enough, and like I wasn't able to understand it enough to really follow.
Okay. You know, the thing I think was interesting too is that you had said the color palette had that kind of pale pastel to it, but yet from the description and from the name, you would think it would be like a really dark comic with like dark neutrals and things like that.
That is something that I really kind of appreciate about it, is it does like seem like it would be kind of like a noir kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the style is not like that at all. It's much more like, I don't want to say cheerful, but more open and brighter. So yeah, that's an interesting observation. I didn't really think about that, but yeah, it's definitely got a lot going on. So definitely, if that like cyberpunky investigation mystery kind of thing is your jam, like definitely check it out.
Cool.
Yeah. What else did you read this time, Leigh?
My next one was also one that sounded really great in the synopsis, but it's another one that I think has a long scope and is well drawn out, but it also I think is newer. So I read up to the point that's current, and I still feel like we haven't really even, we've just barely touched the tip of the iceberg on that one. And so I'm eager to see what happens next, because I do think it's going to be interesting, but it just, it hasn't gotten that far yet, even though it seems like it because there's lots of pages. But like you said, things can develop much slower in a webcomic. And there's something about that I do kind of like. I do like that you can kind of take time with it. It's almost like, the difference between a movie and a TV series. The TV series gives you extra time to delve into storylines and characters. And I think it's the same with webcomics. And I also, from an artist and writer point of view, I do like the idea of only having to do one page a week or whenever they release it. I said, that's doable if I was doing that instead of, because I mean, I always have my dream of doing my graphic novel. I'm like, oh, who has the time for that? But I mean, if you break it up as like, I only have to do a page this week, then, it might even be a little bit more doable than that. And I kind of like that about webcomics. So there are things that appeal to it, but then there's other things that if you're an impatient person and you just want to get to the good stuff, it's hard to stay patient on that.
For sure.
So the other one that I did was The Substitutes. Let me see if I can find myself the synopsis for that. Okay, here we go. All right, The Substitutes, which also let me get the author of that so that we give them credit. Here we go. The Substitutes by, I think you would pronounce it Myisha, Myisha Haynes. So that's how I pronounce it. I'm so sorry if I'm wrong about that in any way. And then the synopsis is what happens when 3 roommates accidentally acquire powerful magical weapons destined for someone else. What happens when the someone else's, the people, who are the someone else's, fall from grace and public favor in the aftermath? What happens when you've suddenly found yourself as the hero to someone else's story? And
Very cool concept.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. And like, I love this picture of it too. It shows like, these regular people, roommates on the subway, like holding these their magical, weapons, but like doing like the staff, he's just kind of holding like, almost like a baseball bat, and then the girl's like she's sitting and using the sword to like lean on type thing.
Yeah.
So it's just so cute, like, these otherworldly magical, strong weapons, and they're just like, do I have to do this? Is this so yeah, no, it's pretty cute. And so, yeah, I do very much like the concept, and I do think that this is going to be a really fun comic the longer it has. I've read it up to the point that it's already here and or current, and like I said, we haven't done too much with it. But I do like the diversity of the cast as well. There's, so many different genders and sexualities and races, and I like that, and body types as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I do really enjoy that, especially the people who are the regular average, the roommates group. The ones that are from the other world tend to be your typical, very strong and, I don't know, a little bit more generalized as the hero type characters. But like I said, that's what's kind of fun about it, is apparently they fall from grace or fall out of favor. And then these people who are your average Joes that you would not consider to be the hero types become the heroes, even if they don't really want to, because they didn't really have a choice. It was an accident, I believe, that they acquired the weapons, and they accidentally opened a portal, like, during a party.
Like you do.
Right.
Like happens.
Yeah, and that's how it happens, is it's an accident. They accidentally go to a different dimension, and that's how things get acquired that they weren't supposed to acquire.
Whoops.
Yeah, so that's kind of fun. So I'm eagerly awaiting what's next. I'm not really sure what's going to happen next. But I do like the different characters, and I can see, even though there's some animosity right now because it's the beginning of the comic between the heroes that were supposed to be and the new heroes that are chosen now, because obviously there's going to be some jealousy and animosity between them, but there also seems to be, there's a couple there that I'm like, oh, I think they're going to end up together. They're kind of cute. So it is going to be interesting to see when these teams have to work together at some point.
Yeah. What is the art style like? For some reason in my head, I'm picturing something kind of like the Backstagers, but I don't know if that's...
Yeah, let me... I'm going to show you a picture, see if you can see that very well.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So, yeah, it's more regular comic style, I would say. The coloring is pretty... I mean, it's pretty typical of any kind of comic or cartoon, I would say. But it's also got a lot of detail, which I appreciate. A lot of color washes, like for instance on this in the subway, everything looks green in the background, but the characters themselves are very colorful. So it's like they make the characters the brightest, or the part that draws your eyes the most in in the panel, whereas the rest of it does have detail, but they tend to keep it in monotone so that you can really pay attention to the characters.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like fun. I'm definitely gonna check that out because I really like that. I always like those stories where you're like really are just the person who's like, what I don't understand what's happening, why, like, okay, and you're just kind of going with it. So
Right.
I always
Those
love those
characters
kind of
out of
stories.
water situations, fish out of water situations,
Yes,
and
exactly.
the underdogs, rooting for the underdogs. I appreciate that
Yeah,
too. The people that are the surprising heroes, the ones that you don't expect.
yeah,
So
yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
because that makes me feel like
Cool.
I could be.
Exactly. Well, kind of along those same lines, the next comic I want to talk about that I read is called The Immortal Nadia Greene by Jamal Campbell. Very, very cool comic, very awesome and good. And one of the things that I really like about it too is that the protagonist is a Black woman, and she has her natural hair for a lot of it, and she's just like very much herself. So the little synopsis on the website just says Nadia Greene, armed with her baseball bat and dominant will, beats up death and becomes a little bit immortal. Sort of. Like it's just it's very straightforward. What I love about it is that like the first few panels or pages are like she's like 5 years old. She's dying in a hospital. She dies. Kind of the same thing with yours, like when gods show up, like everything else freezes and then kind of becomes a little washed out. And then she's just like, she and the person she's interacting with is very clear. And so Hel, Hel, who I imagine is kind of the amalgam or the original like Hela, kind of queen of the death, whatever situation, shows up and is like, hey, I'm here to like bring you along to the next world. And then out of nowhere, Nadia just swings this baseball bat into her face and is like, nah, I'm not ready for that. And so just like, it's so good to have this kind of like, again, like origin story of this person who has some sort of power. We don't really know where it came from or why she has it or how much she can kind of use it. But she's just like, no, like I know what I'm gonna do, and it's survive, and it's beat up the people who are gonna come after me, and it's be my own self, and it's really cool to see. Kind of thematically, it reminds me a lot of The Burning Metronome
Yeah.
by R. Allen Brooks, which we read and talked about a long, long time ago, because it is kind of mixing this mythology with this kind of everyday life situation. But what I really appreciate about this one is that all of the gods, they have very similar styles, so they all like look different and they have different outfits, but all of their outfits are black. They're just all in like different styles, and there's something about all of them that is just like very slightly off. Like Hel is always like kind of floating off the ground, but her back is bent like so far back that you're like, well, that can't be normal. And like she has a few interactions with Hermes, and then you meet kind of Odin and Anubis and some different gods, but like it wasn't like when we read that all women space version of the Odyssey and how like we had such a hard time being like, wait, who's who and what do they want? And the character concepts of all the gods was really cool, but it was also really difficult to kind of comprehend. This makes it really easy. Like, it almost doesn't matter who's who. Like, the story is about Nadia and not necessarily like the motivations and actions of the gods. Like, they're a part of it, but I kind of finished up halfway through the second chapter, I guess, where one of the gods gets killed, and they think it's Morrigan, who is 3, and so one of them gets killed, and so they go to Nadia to be like, "What did you do?" And Nadia's like, "It wasn't me. I don't know what you're talking about." But then they kind of ask her to help figure out who did it. So it's this really interesting, like, she has this kind of relationship with the gods where they will send people after her because they know she's not supposed to be alive and not having the power that she has. But then she'll just like kick their butts and be like, no, you can't, you don't get to do that. And in some ways they kind of have this really interesting like relationship of needing each other in some way. So highly recommend. The art style is very cool. It's got a really good bright color scheme. It is very kind of like probably like late 90s, early 2000s, like superhero comics. Like I'm picturing like Spider-Man, or even like a little later, like Spider-Gwen. It's got that kind of like very crisp, very detailed, very brightly colored style that really works for it. So yeah, highly recommend. And it's also pretty easy to follow the story. And even though you don't really know exactly what's going on or how it's going to pan out, like, again, you're really coming at it from the perspective of Nadia, so she really gives it that very human perspective. And all of her looks are so good. Like that first little part, she's 5, and then you see her when she's 15, and then when she's 22, and just like she just looks so good the whole time. So yeah, definitely go check it out. The Immortal Nadia Greene. It's a really fun comic.
That does sound fun. I always like those ones that are like a play on mythology or, you know, fairy tales, anything like that. I think it's fun to flip the switch on those and, you know, make them more human, make them more relatable, make them more diverse, more correct, you know.
Yeah.
I think I think that's good.
I think it's also, you know, refreshing if you think about like classic literature, like Greek plays, even Shakespeare to a certain extent, like a lot of, and I'm quoting specifically like Western religious and mythological history here, is that there tends to be this sense that like God or the gods are all powerful and all knowing, and if they do something to you, too bad, and like you are stuck with it and there's really nothing you can do to like change that. And so the fact that Nadia is just like, I have my own thing to do. Like, you can't control my life. You can't control me. I don't work for you and you can't hunt me down. Like, I just really love that freedom that she has to just be herself, and then also sort of sometimes deal with this God stuff.
Sounds a tiny bit like after Harley Quinn, you know, frees herself from Joker, and that, you know, I'm going to be myself. Especially when you said she took a bat to. Yeah, I was like, yeah, that sounds a little Harley.
Yeah,
So
it's really
fun.
good. Yeah.
Very good.
And then I think there was one more you wanted to share with me, Leigh. Is that right?
Yes. So the last one I had, I really enjoyed, and it's a lot of fun. I almost wish there was a paper copy of it because I think it would be fun because it's in kind of a style of like the old time comics, kind of like Archie's comics type feel. I think it would be fun, or like you know, in a newspaper or something like that, or a magazine, like an older magazine, I think. So it's called Band versus Band, and it's very much red, white, and blue and pink. You know, that's kind of what the coloring is. And like I said, the art style feels very much like the old Archie's comics. And so yeah, it has that kind of 50s, 60s feel, but yet the storyline is very much current. So there's 2 bands. One's kind of like the, you know, sweet and good one, and the other one's kind of like the dark and bad one type thing. But it's funny how they kind of like put these 2 in these categories, but yet, you know, they're dealing with very realistic things, and they're also very similar some at times. So anyway, the first band, which is supposed to be like the sweet, wholesome rock band, is called the Candy Hearts, and their lead singer is Honey Heart. And so she's real sweet, and they're all about like, you know, they do a lot of like performances at schools to like teach kids to stay in school and, you know, things like that, and don't do drugs and all that kind of thing. And then the other band is called the Sour Balls, which is like the rebellious rock band, and they're just out to make trouble and anarchy. And that's led by Turpentine is her name. And yeah, it just feels like one of those 90s bands kind of grunge, kind of punk type thing, almost like Garbage or, you know, one of those bands that, or No Doubt, you know, those ones that we grew up on that I'm like, oh, I love that. You know, I can almost hear their music when they're playing. I'm like, oh, I can hear the sound for that. So yeah, it definitely has that late 90s, early 2000s feel to them. So I definitely like their band, whereas the other one seems more like you know, those kind of Hanson type bands that are not my favorite. But anyway, so both lead singers are queer, although Honey Heart, I don't think really understands that about herself. I think she's just barely figuring out that about herself. And she's starting to have feelings towards Turpentine, but does not understand it in any way. And is almost kind of like pushing it away a little bit. But yet, why am I so drawn to her? Whereas, you know, Turpentine, you know, I mean, the comic tries to play off like it's a 50s and 60s ones where it's not graphic, but I mean, you know, whenever they're at parties, you can see, I was like, okay, in the background, somebody's fooling around back, you know, so it's like, you know, they, you know that they're sexually active, and everything like that. And, you know, they have characters in their band that you know, fool around and this and that, and you know, it doesn't show anything, but it definitely suggests it. There's a lot of sexual suggestion in this, and I enjoy that a lot.
Nice.
A lot of interesting puns and, like, you know, things that people, if you're not careful, could miss it, and you're like, oh, that was cute, that little interaction there. So anyway, these bands are just constantly clashing at every, you know, event that they cross paths at, and, you know, want to be the best band. And you can see that they don't like each other, but there's also this sexual tension between the two lead singers, and it's adorable, and I really enjoy that, because it's like, you know, Honey can't figure out why she's having these feelings and why she would, because this person is, you know, none of her values really type thing. And then Turpentine's the opposite. I mean, she's like, you know, totally open to that she's queer and everything like that, but, you know, is almost mad at herself for finding Honey attractive type thing, and like irritated by her, but irritated and also attracted. So it's yeah, it's fun. And like I said, I've gone far enough you know, to be able to do the webcomic, and there's still that sexual tension, so it hasn't actually gotten to that point. I kept trying to like skip through and be like, when's it gonna get to the point where they like kiss or something? You
Just
know,
kiss already.
Exactly. It almost felt very much like the Xena Gabrielle, the subtext. Like, come on already, we know what's happening here. We're not stupid. Just get on with it. But I think that's the fun of this comic, is the back and forth and letting it build and waiting for that moment, which I haven't gotten to yet. And also, like I said, you know, the stories, sometimes it's continuous and sometimes it's just a real short one, and then it's a new adventure that, you know, happens, or sometimes it's only an adventure of one band and only an adventure of another band. And then sometimes there's these little short comics of the folks. Oh, I forgot to say who wrote it. Let's see. This one is written by Kathleen, Jacques, I believe. And so then there's these little storyline of, you know, that seem like it's the authors and like their experience of making this comic and something like that. So it's like there's so many different storylines that kind of it almost like it feels like, you know, those dime store comics where it just was a, you know, sometimes it's a continuous story like tune in next time, and then other times it's just a little short fit thing. And so it doesn't always continue all the time. So I think that's why it takes longer, because we don't know. But then you get to the next page, we don't know if that's going to be a continuation of the same story or if it's a little break. And some of them even have, like, they do the coloring contests. Like, they make it feel like it's a newspaper, or there's like a little word search puzzle or something. And so, yeah, I was like, you know, I feel like I would appreciate this more in print, because it's not like I can color it on my screen and everything. I mean, I guess you could if you were reading it on a tablet or something like that, but it feels like those parts, those elements that are the more interactive with your audience ones are kind of lost on the webcomic thing. And I think you can order these in print. I thought I saw that on the website that you can order some of these, but I definitely think that this one would feel more natural in a print situation than it is in a webcomic one. But it does feel like every week is, you know, tune in next time, you know, what's going to happen next, you know, type thing. Yeah. But anyway, it's really cute. I really enjoy it. It kind of reminded me a little bit of like back in the 80s, which, I grew up in, the Gem and the Holograms or Barbie and
Yeah.
the Rockers type feel, those cartoons that we used to watch as kids. So it's got a kind of a vintage feel, but it's got a modern twist on it.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say from what you're describing, it does definitely feel like very 90s, like
Yeah.
sitcom, like high
Yeah.
school sitcom almost, but like Betty and Veronica comics, we all know they just should have ended up together.
Right.
Fuck Archie. Like, like just, and then, yeah, like Gabrielle and Xena, like those kind of dynamics in that kind of like girl power 90s kind of Lisa Frank
Yeah, or like a
versus
Josie and the Pussycats type
Winona
thing.
Ryder. Yeah, yeah. So
Battle of the
it sounds really
Bands.
fun.
Yeah, it is, and it was compared to the other ones that I read. It's much more surfacey and upbeat, and not too, like it didn't stress me out quite as much as the other one did. So
Not so pandemic-y.
no, not at all. So yeah.
Cool. I'll definitely have to check that out. And that's actually a perfect segue into my last comic that I want to talk about, which I love
Excellent.
so much. And Leigh, you have to read it because you are gonna love it so
I'm
much.
excited
Oh
to
my
hear
God.
about it. I can't wait.
It's ridiculous. So it is called Rock and Riot. It is
Okay.
by an artist and author called Chelsey Furedi. And I love it so much. Like there are a few comics that we've talked about in the past that have like really, really stuck with me. Bloom, of course, is one of those. Cosmo Knights is one of those
Yeah.
that I just love so much. And this is definitely one of those. Like, as soon as I started reading it, I was like, well, I have to read everything because it's so good. So the synopsis on the website is Rock and Riot follows the tales of opposing teenage gangs in the 1950s with an LGBTQ theme. Will the teens set aside their differences to fight for what they have in common? And yeah, so it's definitely like along the same lines of as band versus band, but it is definitely like full on like 50s aesthetic. But what is so great about it is it takes this classic kind of American story and kind of the author is from New Zealand, so it's kind of interesting to kind of see like their perspective on kind of what that like Greece kind of like vision of what the America in the 50s looked like Happy Days kind of thing.
Mm.
But there's a lot of body diversity, there's a lot of ethnicity diversity. The art style is just fantastic. Like it's a really fun and like imaginative idea, and the artwork just perfectly complements that. It's got like bold lines, bright colors. There's so much diversity again in like skin tone and body size, but also in gender expression. So kind of the main two gangs are there's like a girl gang and then a guy gang.
Mm-hmm.
And then this person shows up and they both want them in their gang, and they're like both trying to be like, hey, you should really be in this gang. And they're like, no, I don't fit into either one of those. And so like in the girl gang, there's a trans girl, and like this new person shows up and kind of creates this like non-binary gang of people who don't fit into like any mold and who just kind of do what they want to do. And it's so cool. And it's so cool to like see it in a world that's like at that time would have been, that we know would have been very homophobic and very
Right.
racist and very fat phobic and like all of these things that they're just not. They are dealing with homophobia because one of the stories is they kind of have to keep their relationship secret, and then they want to go to prom together, but they're not allowed to because they'll only let guy girl couples in. And but it's just like it's so good, Leigh. It's so good. It is just brilliant, and I love it. And I love that like literally everybody in it is queer. Like it's so it's just the best.
I
And
love
it
those
just
ones that you get so involved in the story and the characters, and you get lost in it to the point that you're like, I have to know. So that's awesome.
yeah. And it is like there's definitely like it's very episodic. Like there are a couple of like kind of through lines, but you can definitely just like kind of jump in wherever. I mean, I don't know any of the characters' names, but that's totally fine because like I recognize them as people and I
Mm-hmm.
recognize their personalities. So like if I jumped in and tried to like pick back up where I was, I'd be like, oh yeah, these characters are dating, or those ones, or this guy's the leader of that gang and whatever. But yeah, and there were times too where it kind of gave me goosebumps in terms of like the way that it talked about queer experience and queer love and consent and like, oh my
Oh,
God,
that's good.
Leigh, it's so good. So everybody, including Leigh, but especially Leigh, should read it. There's I don't know how many episodes there are. I want to say like 20 or so. So it's definitely like, and those are all maybe like 8 to 10 pages. So it's definitely not something that is overwhelming.
That's good. Yeah, because
And yeah,
sometimes
I was just
that's
like, as soon as I started it, I was like, I just have to read all of this. This is so amazing. So yeah, so I'm glad we both kind of finished up talking about ones that we just really love, that brought us joy, that celebrated something that's both important to us and is, necessary to continue talking about. And in a pandemic, it's nice to have that kind of stuff, to kind of have that uplifting, happy, like, I just
right.
read a book in which there was like so little conflict. I was a little surprised, but then I was like, no, like this is good. Like this is what's important and this is what I needed right now. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think this was really fun. I think for people who are looking to get into webcomics, I think there's definitely it's very daunting to kind of figure out what is good and what's out there. The great thing about webcomics, of course, is accessibility. You don't have to buy them. They're available online. You don't have to like go to a library, or you do have to have access to some form of technology, but
Mm-hmm.
they're very accessible, and I think that's great. But I think, for me, like I said, I just looked at lists that were like cool webcomics by queer people, or that are by or about people of color, and you could literally do like, I want to read webcomics about science fiction, or I want to only read horror
Mm-hmm.
comics. Like there's definitely ways to kind of find what you're looking for, and then also maybe that will lead you to something new. I did want to do a shout out to Novae, because that, of course, is a
Yes.
webcomic that it came up on one of the lists that I found, and that was one of our very first episodes, interviewing Kaiju about Novae, and it's something I really need to catch back up on, because it's really
Agreed.
just beautiful, and it's such a great story. So shout out to Novae as well, Novae, a really great comic to catch up on as well.
Yes, I agree. And then we also wanted to mention Lore Olympus. Both of us kind of started it, have not gotten too far on it, but I do plan on reading more of it. I found what I have read is very interesting. That one is kind of really taking off right now. And
Mhm.
when I asked people online on social different web comics that were their favorite to get some ideas of ones to do for this podcast, that was one of the number one ones
Hmm.
that people suggested. So I definitely
Yeah,
want to shout out for that one too. And I'm definitely looking forward to reading more of that one.
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to add, Leigh, about webcomics in general, or just what we're doing here at File 741, or what is on your mind?
That's a tall order there, Becca.
Right. You don't actually have to like, you know.
No, I don't want to add anything else. I think on web comics. For me, it's a very different. It's just a different way of reading comics. It's completely different. Like I said, I'm not used to them being so long and drawn out. I am used to the paper comic and things, storylines getting further and faster. So I think it takes I have to shift my mindset and be in the right mindset to read a web comic so that I can be patient for it. And I think there are ones like these ones that we just talked about that grabbed our attention, and ones that are a little harder to grab your attention. But that's what's so great about web comics, is that there's so many out there that you can find ones that do speak to you and do fit with your mindset and how you like to read comics and such. So yeah, I like the genre. I think it's really a great opportunity. I think it's a great way for artists to get their work out without needing a publisher, and really having more control over it as well. So yeah, I think very highly of webcomics, and I look forward to reading more of them in the future.
Agreed. I will just say really quickly
Yeah.
too that again, thank you for listening. If you're still around, we really appreciate it. We're really looking forward to doing more in the future. I think especially when COVID stuff gets better. That we've got some plans about. We want to go to some cons. We want to talk to some more people, do some more interviews, get out there a little bit more. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I think it's been a little difficult on both of us to keep this going. But a lot of it is, like I said, Beckah moved. I mean, it's harder to get our schedules together, and when things are stressful right now. So we apologize for that, but we are definitely working on it. We're not giving up. We will continue this podcast as long as we possibly can. And and we are devoted to you, which is why we are still doing this. So thank you so much for listening and for sticking with us, even through all our ups and downs and inconsistencies. We appreciate that, and we appreciate you very much.
Absolutely.
So this has been yet another File 741. I'm Leigh.
And I'm Beckah.
Thank you for listening, and please like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can tune in to all of our podcasts on iTunes, Podbean, YouTube, or at thefemininedfiles.net or at thefemininedfiles.net. I'll have to edit that one out. Good Lord.
You also said podcasts.
Okay, would you like me to start this one
Podcast.
over? Yeah, that was a little bit of an accent there. I almost.
No, this is perfect. It's all staying in.
Okay. Speaking is hard.